Everything we thought we know about Avengers Endgame was a carefully constructed illusion. What if Tony Stark's heroic sacrifice wasn't just the ultimate act of love for humanity, but also a calculated execution designed by none other than Doctor Strange himself? What if the man we mourned as the savior of the Marvel Cinematic Universe was actually destined to become its greatest villain? A threat so dangerous, so catastrophic, that even Thanos would pale in comparison. These aren't just wild speculations. When we take a closer look at the 14,605 possible futures Doctor Strange saw, when we examine his cryptic actions, his suspiciously perfect timing, and when we connect it all to the terrifying possibilities opened in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, a chilling theory emerges. Tony Stark wasn't meant to live, because had he survived, he would have transformed into the most dangerous figure the multiverse has ever known, Doctor Doom. Now ask yourself, why did Strange insist there was only one chance, one singular path to victory out of 14 million? Why did he give that haunting look at Tony before the final battle, signaling the one outcome that required Tony's death? And why, when we later see Strange wielding unimaginable powers across universes, defeating cosmic level threats on his own, does it suddenly feel like he didn't tell us the whole truth back in Endgame? If Strange himself was capable of taking down Thanos, as we saw in alternate universes in Multiverse of Madness, why wasn't that part of the one way? Unless, of course, the true danger wasn't Thanos at all. It was Tony Stark. This is where the puzzle pieces start to connect. Strange's vision of the future wasn't just about defeating Thanos. It was about protecting the multiverse from something far worse. Imagine the genius of Tony Stark, combined with the ambition of his endless pursuit of control, amplified by the trauma of the snap and his near brush with omnipotence. Imagine if Tony had survived, armed with the knowledge of the Infinity Stones, the ability to outthink gods, and the obsession to ensure peace by any means necessary. That's not the story of Iron Man the Savior. That's the origin story of Doom. Let's walk back into that battlefield on Titan, where Strange closes his eyes and surrenders himself to a vision of futures. He tells the team he has seen 14,605 outcomes, and in only one, they win. At first glance, it feels like an impossible number, designed only to emphasize the hopelessness of their situation. But think about the implications here. 14 million branching paths, each with a different possibility, each with unique decisions. Strange doesn't just see Thanos winning or losing. He sees what happens after, the ripple effects across time. He doesn't just see Tony fighting. He sees Tony becoming. And that's the terrifying secret. Because what if, in most of those futures, yes, they defeat Thanos, but the cost is watching Tony rise into something monstrous? We have to remember something about Tony Stark. He was always teetering on the edge of savior and tyrant. From the moment he created Ultron, we saw glimpses of that darker path. He wanted a suit of armor around the world, protection at any cost, control over chaos. Ultron was his failed attempt, but what if Ultron was only a glimpse of the deeper destiny waiting within him? Strange, as the keeper of the Time Stone, could see the fullness of that destiny. He could see Tony stepping into a role not of a fallen hero, but of a ruler, a conqueror, a man who finally solved the equation of control not by protecting humanity, but by dominating it. That is Doctor Doom. And here's where it gets even more chilling. In Doctor Strange, in the Multiverse of Madness, we're shown universes where Strange himself defeats Thanos. Universes where victory didn't require Tony's sacrifice. So why is Strange's one chance in Endgame dependent on Tony's death? The answer is painfully clear. It's not about beating Thanos. It's about eliminating Tony before his transformation into Doom becomes inevitable. Strange wasn't just saving the universe. He was pruning a branch of possibility, cutting off a future where Tony Stark's brilliance and obsession spiral into tyranny. Now, skeptics might say, but Doom is Victor Von Doom, not Tony Stark. And they're right in the comics. But we have to remember the MCU thrives on remixing, subverting, and reimagining iconic characters. Just as Sylvie became a female Loki variant, just as He Who Remains became a multiversal version of Kang, what if Doom isn't locked to one face, one identity? What if, in some universes, Doom isn't Von Doom at all, but Stark himself? We already know variants can shift drastically. And even if Doom is still Von Doom in one reality, there's no reason another variant of Doom couldn't be born from Tony Stark's choices in another. Strange could have seen this. He could have seen Tony's path not just as a possibility, but as an inevitability. That's why his only option was sacrifice. Think about Tony's journey. In Endgame, we see a man who finally finds peace, who builds a family, who has everything to lose. And yet when the time comes, he risks it all, not for ambition, but for the universe. That's the Tony we love. But what if that Tony had survived? The survivor's guilt, the trauma of wielding godhood, the knowledge that he alone could end threats before they ever began. Would that same Tony still be content to rest? Or would he return to his old habits of control? What happens when a man who craves solutions is handed the understanding of timelines, universes, and inevitabilities? What happens when his obsession with ensuring safety mutates into a belief that only he should decide the future? That's not Iron Man anymore. That's Doom. And here's where Strange's silence speaks volumes. Remember that haunting moment when Strange raises his finger, signaling one to Tony in the final battle? That wasn't just hope. That was consent. It was permission for Tony to walk into death because Strange knew that survival was the true danger. Strange orchestrated that ending, not just because Tony could wield the stones, but because Tony had to wield them and die. Anything else and the multiverse would burn. Now let's connect the dots with what we've seen since. In Multiverse of Madness, Strange is confronted by the Illuminati, a council designed to police dangerous variants. And what do they warn him of? That Strange himself is the greatest threat in the multiverse. The irony is obvious, but it also hints at the deeper truth. Variants aren't bound by identity. Heroes can become villains. Villains can become heroes. So if Strange can be the greatest threat in one universe, why not Tony in another? Why not the Tony we thought we knew? That's why Strange acted in Endgame, not to protect us from Thanos, but to protect us from Stark. But here's a scarier thought. What if Strange failed? What if Tony's death in Endgame wasn't the end of his story, but the beginning of another? Variants exist. Infinite possibilities exist. Who's to say the Tony we lost isn't mirrored by countless others who survived? Strange may have prevented one Doom, but what about the rest? What if out there, across the multiverse, there is already a Tony Stark variant rising into the mask of Doom, rewriting his destiny, ruling empires of timelines? And what if that version is destined to return, not as Iron Man the fallen hero, but as Doom the eternal conqueror? Think about how poetic that would be. The man who started the MCU, who birthed the Avengers, becomes the ultimate villain that the multiverse must face. A villain who isn't driven by chaos like Loki or hunger like Thanos, but by cold, rational order. A villain who doesn't want to destroy the universe, but to perfect it on his terms. And the cruel twist? He'd believe he was saving it. That's Tony Stark as Doom. That's the story Strange saw. That's the horror he had to prevent. And the evidence keeps piling up. Strange tells Tony directly, if I tell you what happens, it won't happen. Why? Because Tony, the eternal tinkerer, would try to change it, control it. Strange had to keep him blind, because knowledge itself could have pushed Tony onto the path of doom. He had to let Tony believe in heroism, in sacrifice, in inevitability. It wasn't kindness. It was containment. Strange wasn't protecting Tony. He was protecting the multiverse from Tony. So when people ask, why didn't Strange use the Time Stone differently? Why didn't he open more doors? Why didn't he fight Thanos with the power we later see him wield? The answer is chillingly simple. He wasn't fighting Thanos. Thanos was never the true war. Tony Stark was. And the only way to win was to sacrifice the one man who could become the multiverse's darkest tyrant. And this opens the door to an even bigger possibility. What if the Doom we eventually see in the MCU isn't Victor Von Doom at all, but Tony Stark himself, or a variant so close that the distinction doesn't matter? Imagine the emotional weight. The Avengers fought alongside Tony, loved him, mourned him. Now imagine them staring into the mask of Doom and realizing the man inside is the same genius they once followed. That's not just a battle. That's tragedy. That's Shakespearean. That's the story Strange was trying to prevent and maybe failed to stop entirely. But here's the truth most fans overlooked. Endgame wasn't the final word on Tony Stark. In fact, it may have only been the prologue of a much darker story. Because when Strange played his chess game with destiny, he didn't erase Tony Stark's potential to become Doom. He only delayed it. The multiverse makes sure of that. Every choice, every sacrifice, every snap creates echoes across infinite branches. So while our universe's Tony died a hero, other versions of him, variants untouched by Strange's sacrifice, could still walk the path toward absolute power. And maybe, just maybe, Strange knew this too. He wasn't erasing Doom from existence. He was buying time before the inevitable. Let's revisit that moment again. Strange looking into the future, his face shifting from horror to grim acceptance. Why horror? Because Thanos' victory was brutal, yes, but that wasn't new. Strange had faced annihilation before. No, the horror came when he saw what happens after victory. Imagine the ripple effect. Tony surviving, rebuilding, taking his obsession with safety and control to new heights. With the Infinity Stones destroyed, Tony wouldn't stop there. He'd find new ways, new technologies, new forms of mastery. Strange saw it. He saw Tony not as Iron Man anymore, but as the architect of something far more terrifying. A kingdom of order across universes. The man who once said, "I am Iron Man," would eventually declare, "I am Doom." This isn't far-fetched when you study Tony's psyche. All his life, Tony Stark was haunted by fear. Fear of failure. Fear of irrelevance. Fear of not being enough to protect the people he loved. It's why he built the suits. It's why he built Ultron. It's why he constantly upgraded, refined, perfected. The genius of Tony Stark was never satisfied. He could never stop tinkering. Even after winning battles, he'd already be planning for the next one. That's the seed of Doom right there. A man so obsessed with preparation, with absolute control, that he ceases to be a protector and becomes a ruler. Dr. Doom, in essence, is Tony Stark stripped of compassion and drowned in obsession. And here's the kicker. Strange himself knows what it means to walk that path. In Multiverse of Madness, we saw firsthand what happens when a man with good intentions tips into tyranny. The sinister Strange variant wasn't born evil. He was born from love, from grief, from trying to fix what was broken. Sound familiar? That's Tony Stark in a nutshell. The parallels are undeniable. Strange saw in Tony the same danger he saw in himself, the capacity to turn salvation into dictatorship. That's why Strange was so decisive. He couldn't risk another sinister Strange, except this time wearing the face of Tony Stark. Now let's talk about proof, because this theory isn't just poetic speculation. Look at the way Strange interacts with Tony throughout Infinity War and Endgame. He doesn't treat him like a friend. He doesn't encourage him. He doesn't inspire him. He manages him. He calculates every word. Remember when Strange tells Tony, "If it comes to saving you, the kid, or the time stone, I will not hesitate to let either of you die." It feels cold, but in hindsight, it's a foreshadowing of what Strange already knew. Tony wasn't meant to survive. And when Tony asks after the snap, "Tell me this is the one," Strange doesn't lie. He just signals. No words, no reassurance, only that single finger raised. Why? Because words could change Tony's path. Strange knew Tony. He knew knowledge could spark rebellion. He had to keep him in the dark until the very last second. And what's even more fascinating is how this reframes Tony's death. Fans see it as heroic sacrifice, but through Strange's lens, it's containment. The only way to prevent Doom's rise was to let Tony burn himself out with the stones. Strange didn't just allow it, he engineered it. He played his role like a puppeteer pulling the final string. Tony's snap wasn't just destiny, it was execution. But here's the haunting part. What if Strange was wrong? What if death wasn't the end of Tony's destiny? The multiverse is built on variants, and variants don't stay buried. For every Tony who dies, another lives. And one of those Tonys could already be on the road to doom. Maybe we've already seen glimpses of it. Remember the Ultron-dominated timeline in What If? That wasn't Stark, but it was Stark's idea come to fruition. A multiversal warning of what happens when his vision is taken to the extreme. Now imagine a variant Tony who survives Endgame, who perfects his designs, who doesn't stop until he's built not just a suit of armor around the world, but around reality itself. That's Doom. That's the variant Strange feared. And if you think Marvel won't take that risk, consider how much weight such a reveal would carry. Introducing Doom as Victor Von Doom is expected. It's comic accurate. But imagine the emotional punch of revealing Doom's mask only to show Tony Stark underneath. Imagine the audience's shock, the hero's heartbreak, the multiverse trembling because the man who began it all has returned, not as a savior, but as the final villain. That's how you escalate stakes beyond Thanos. That's how you make audiences gasp. And the seeds have already been planted by Strange. Now let's not ignore the symbolism. Doom in the comics is obsessed with both science and mysticism. He blends technology with sorcery, intellect with power. Who else embodies that duality better than Tony Stark and Stephen Strange? One master of machines, the other of magic. But if Strange is the magician who glimpses futures, Stark is the engineer who builds them. Together, they represent two sides of the same coin. But what happens when one side corrupts? When Stark becomes Doom, he doesn't just rival Strange. He eclipses him. He becomes the union of both science and control, reshaping reality with cold calculation. Strange had to stop that before it began. And yet Strange may have underestimated just how inevitable Doom's rise really is. Because as much as Strange pruned one branch by sacrificing Tony, the multiverse is infinite. Other Tonys remain. Other possibilities linger. And we know Marvel loves its variants. Loki variants, Strange variants, Spider-Man variants, all rewriting their stories in different universes. Why would Tony be any different? Strange may have cut down one Tony, but he can't cut them all. Somewhere right now, a Stark is rising. Somewhere. Right now, a Stark is donning the mask of Doom. This raises another chilling question. What if Strange himself knows this? What if, after Multiverse of Madness, Strange realizes the battle isn't over? That his choice in Endgame only delayed Doom's rise? That explains why Strange continues to meddle in universes, why he allies with and defies cosmic powers, why he seems restless. He knows what's coming. He knows Doom is coming. Not Von Doom, Stark Doom. And the worst part, Strange may have to face the guilt that he created this. By letting Tony die, he gave birth to 1,000 Tonys who didn't. He played the game of time, but time plays dirty. And now the bill is coming due. Let's take a step back and imagine what Doom Stark would even look like. It's not about the armor. It's about ideology. Doom believes he alone can save the world, that only through his rule can chaos be contained. And isn't that exactly Tony's deepest flaw? He never trusted anyone else to solve the problem. He always believed it had to be him, the only man brilliant enough, fast enough, prepared enough. That arrogance, wrapped in compassion, makes him Iron Man. But arrogance stripped of compassion makes him Doom. Doom isn't born from hatred. Doom is born from belief that no one else can do the job. And Tony Stark has always believed that. Now consider how powerful this storytelling twist would be for the Avengers. Imagine Spider-Man facing Doom only to realize it's the man he called mentor. Imagine Strange, haunted by his choices, confronting the very monster he tried to prevent. Imagine the multiverse torn apart not by Kang, not by Thanos, but by Tony Stark himself. That's tragedy. That's mythic. That's the kind of storytelling Marvel craves when it needs to raise the stakes higher than ever before. But here's the most haunting layer. What if Doom isn't just one Tony Stark variant, but the true destiny of Tony Stark across all timelines? What if Strange didn't just see one or two Stark Doom outcomes, but millions of them? What if the one timeline where Tony dies isn't the lucky break, but the only delay button that buys time before Doom inevitably arrives? That means Strange didn't solve the problem. He only postponed it. The multiverse is still barreling toward Doom, Stark Doom, and Strange knows it. This explains why Strange seems so burdened in his later appearances. He's not just tired from magic. He's carrying the weight of knowing he sacrificed one Stark, but countless others are still out there. The fight isn't over. It's only beginning. And when Doom finally arrives, Strange will know that his in-game choice was never enough. He may have saved his universe for a moment, but the multiverse will pay the price. So when we ask, why didn't Strange tell Tony the truth? Why didn't he warn the Avengers? The answer is obvious, because the truth would destroy them. Imagine telling Steve Rogers, telling Peter Parker, telling Pepper Potts that Tony Stark was destined to become the greatest villain in existence. Imagine the collapse of faith, the shattering of morale. Strange had to keep it secret. He had to carry that burden alone. He wasn't just the Sorcerer Supreme. He was the silent executioner of destiny, and the silence itself was his heaviest curse. And yet, as we peel back these layers, one chilling realization remains. Tony Stark may already be on his way back. We've seen Marvel plant seeds of returns before. Multiversal cameos, alternate versions, whispers of resurrection. Imagine Doom removing his mask, revealing Robert Downey Jr.'s face, but not the face of the man we loved. A colder face, a harder face, a Stark who survived, who thrived, who decided that only through domination could peace be achieved. That's the final card Strange tried to hide from us. That's the possibility he saw in those 14 million futures. That's the true endgame. The deeper we go, the more it feels inevitable. Tony Stark's story was never about endings, it was about transformations. From arrogant weapons dealer to armored hero, from reckless billionaire to selfless father, his arc was always about change. But what if the final transformation is yet to come? What if the death we mourned in Endgame wasn't closure, but cocoon? Because when Strange said he saw only one future, what he really meant is that there was only one way to delay what was written into Stark's destiny. Death wasn't the end of his journey. It was the only thing powerful enough to stall the arrival of Doom. This is what makes the idea so terrifying. Doom isn't an external villain who invades our universe. Doom is born from within. Doom is the shadow of Tony Stark stretched across the multiverse. That means every act of heroism, every selfless sacrifice, every brilliant innovation was walking on a razor's edge toward tyranny. Strange didn't kill Doom. He only bought us time before Doom inevitably manifests somewhere else. And in the grand scale of the multiverse, time is never on our side. But imagine the weight of this revelation for Strange himself. The man who saw 14 million futures knows that even the one victory he engineered cannot hold forever. He knows Doom is out there, a Stark variant rising in another branch, another corner of infinite possibility. That's why his story feels incomplete after Endgame. Why he continues to carry secrets. Why his eyes carry that fatigue. Strange doesn't just fear demons, monsters, or cosmic entities. He fears Tony Stark. Not the man who died, but the man who might rise again. And the emotional impact of this is staggering. Because Tony Stark isn't just another character in the Marvel story. He is the character. The beating heart of the MCU. The man who started it all. The genius who built the Avengers. The father figure to Peter Parker. The symbol of sacrifice. To turn that man into Doom isn't just a plot twist. It's the ultimate betrayal of our expectations. It's the weaponization of our love for the character. It's Marvel saying, you thought Thanos was the greatest threat? No. The real danger has always been Tony Stark himself. Think about what that means for the heroes left behind. Imagine Spider-Man, who still carries Tony's shadow on his shoulders, facing a version of his mentor twisted into Doom. Imagine the heartbreak, the confusion, the rage. He would have to fight the man whose approval he craved, the man who saved his life. That isn't just a battle, it's a psychological war. Now imagine Strange, burdened with the guilt of orchestrating Tony's death, standing face to face with Doom, realizing that his sacrifice didn't erase the danger, only delayed it. That's not just conflict, it's cosmic irony. The man who tried to stop Doom will be forced to fight the very monster he couldn't prevent. And what about the Avengers as a whole? They united to honor Tony's sacrifice. They told the world that he was the savior of the universe. His legacy became their foundation. Now imagine that foundation cracking when Doom arrives. The man they revered as their greatest hero revealed as the greatest threat. The emotional devastation would tear them apart. How do you fight someone who was once your brother, your leader, your friend? How do you destroy the legacy of the man who saved your life? That's not just a battle against Doom. That's a battle against themselves. And this is where the multiverse makes it even more complex. Because Doom wouldn't be just a Stark. He could be the Stark. The one who lived in a timeline just one breath away from theirs. The same jokes, the same smirk, the same memories, but with one different choice, one different outcome that hardened into tyranny. How do you fight someone who feels like the man you lost? How do you kill the face you once loved? That's the tragedy that elevates Doom beyond Thanos or Kang. He's not just an enemy. He's family. He's grief made flesh. He's loss come back with vengeance. Let's also not ignore the poetry of it all. Doom wears a mask. Doom hides behind armor. Doom's face is scarred by destiny. Doesn't that sound familiar? Tony Stark also wore armor to hide his wounds. His emotional scars defined his entire arc. Doom is the darker reflection of that. Where Stark wore his armor to protect, Doom wears his to dominate. Where Stark built to save, Doom builds to rule. They are mirrors. Opposites on the same spectrum. That's why the reveal of Doom as Tony Stark would hit harder than any villain reveal in the MCU's history. It wouldn't just be about power. It would be about inevitability. It would be about destiny fulfilled. And here's where it gets even scarier. What if Doom isn't just one variant of Tony, but the inevitable convergence of all Tonys? Think of it this way. Every timeline, every branch, every universe births a Tony Stark. Some die heroes. Some fail. Some succeed. But what if the multiverse itself bends toward one outcome? Tony Stark becoming Doom. What if Strange, in his visions, didn't just see one Doom, he saw millions? And in every path, every branch, every possible reality, the same conclusion emerges. Doom is not an accident. Doom is the destiny of Stark. That means Strange's choice wasn't victory. It was delay. He didn't save us from Doom. He only bought us time to prepare for him. And if the MCU is leading where it seems, that time is running out. The cracks in reality are already showing. Variants are colliding. Universes are overlapping. And through those cracks, Doom could step through at any moment. The man we loved as Iron Man, now twisted into something unimaginable. The face of salvation turned into the face of domination. Now let's think about the scale of the threat. Thanos wanted balance. Kang wants control of time. But Doom, Stark Doom, would want more. He wouldn't just want to rule universes. He'd want to perfect them. He'd want to design them like his machines, flawless, ordered, stripped of chaos. That's the horror. Doom wouldn't think of himself as evil. He'd think of himself as right. He'd think of himself as saving everyone. And isn't that the most terrifying villain of all? The one who believes he's the hero. Picture the confrontation. Strange, standing on the battlefield, cloak whipping in the wind, realizing that everything he feared has come true. Doom steps forward, his armor gleaming, his mask reflecting Strange's face. And then he removes it. And there it is. Tony Stark. Not our Tony, but Tony nonetheless. A man with the same eyes, the same voice, the same memories, but colder, sharper, merciless. Strange's worst nightmare. The Avengers' greatest heartbreak. The multiverse's ultimate doom. And the storytelling possibilities are endless. Doom versus Strange. Doom versus Spider-Man. Doom versus the Avengers who loved him. But the most heartbreaking battle of all would be Doom versus the memory of himself. Because somewhere deep inside that mask, somewhere beneath that armor, there might still be the faintest echo of Tony Stark. And the tragedy is that it won't matter. Because destiny has spoken. And destiny calls him Doom. So when fans ask, why did Strange really let Tony die? The answer is clear. It wasn't just about defeating Thanos. It was about stopping Doom. It was about pruning the path before it blossomed into tyranny. But as the multiverse unfolds, we begin to see the truth. You can prune branches, but you can't stop destiny. And destiny says that Tony Stark, in some form, in some universe, will rise again. Not as a hero, but as Doom. That's the story Strange saw. That's the horror he couldn't speak aloud. And that's the threat waiting for us in the future of the MCU. Now here's the final thought that ties it all together. When Strange lifted his finger in Endgame, showing Tony the one chance, we all thought it meant one victory. But what if it meant something else? What if it meant one delay? One reprieve? One temporary salvation before the storm? Strange wasn't promising hope. He was signaling sacrifice. Sacrifice not just for the universe, but for the multiverse. Tony had to die. Not to save us forever, but to give us one final chance before Doom comes. That's the meaning of the finger. That's the hidden truth of Endgame. That's the story we've been blind to all along. And when Doom finally steps out of the shadows, when that mask finally drops, when Tony Stark's face stares back at us, not with love, but with judgment, that's when Strange's burden will make sense. That's when we'll realize he wasn't lying to us. He was protecting us. Not from Thanos. Not from Kang. But from Tony Stark himself. From Doom. And that, my friends, is the theory. The one that flips Endgame upside down. Redefines Strange's choices and reframes Tony Stark's legacy in the most chilling way imaginable. It's not just about sacrifice. It's about destiny. A destiny where Iron Man doesn't just save the world. He threatens the multiverse. A destiny where Tony Stark doesn't just become a legend. He becomes Doom. So if this theory shook you, if it made you rethink everything you thought you knew about the MCU, then don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dive theories, and share this with your fellow Marvel fans who need to hear the truth. And if you really want to support our work directly, consider dropping a $25 super chat. Every bit of support helps us keep exploring, keep theorizing, and keep uncovering the hidden stories the MCU doesn't want you to see. Because the truth is out there, and sometimes it's far scarier than we ever imagined.